Welcome to OP Jindal Global University. My name is Megha Gupta, and we're happy to receive all of you here for JGU's first biannual CSR conclave on SDGs. In today's panel discussion, we'll discuss policies and procedures and share knowledge and insights on sustainability, climate change, health sciences, and create a tangible societal impact by way of technological innovations and solutions. We're so glad to have over 12 socially conscious corporates join us for the first conclave. It is a glorious opportunity for the organizations, researchers, faculty, and students to mix and mingle. To kickstart this lovely day here together, I would like to invite Professor Padmanabha Ramanujam to commence the CSR conclave with a welcome address.
Good morning. It is indeed a very important day for us. Yes, we have done many activities on campus, but activity exclusively focused on CSR has always been a need, I would say. When we look at the space that we are in, right, I think it is very important to understand to the students, and I think the student community, you ought to understand that it is very important in your life also to give back, right? Keeping that in mind, but also various other factors in mind, many of our students also seek, eventually a job responsibility in NGOs, but they don't understand what it takes, to be part of these organizations or think tanks which work on CSR. So we thought that today we could give our students an opportunity to understand from our speakers, our panelists, our distinguished speakers who are on the stage, so that you will get a perspective, as to why this subject is of so great importance today. First of all, on behalf of Vice Chancellor, Professor Dr. C. Raj Kumar, and Professor of Eminence and Advisor to Vice Chancellor, Professor Dr. Sani, I want to welcome all the speakers, Mr. Amit Kirti, Mr. Shubhrajyoti Bovek, and all the distinguished panel speakers for today's event. And I really don't want to spend 2 minutes talking on CSR because I'm sure there are many people who would be reflecting on this subject. But I thought I would want to emphasize on 2 innovations that this institution is trying to pursue, and with the support of all the panelists and also the distinguished speakers, I want to see how we can take it forward. We know that we always reach out to organizations for internships and placements, but that's mundane that every organization and every institution does. At OP Jindal Global University, we are innovating. We are innovating, we are creatively thinking, we want to create new space, and we also want to create new challenge for our students. I was grateful that during my working at Jindal, I've had an opportunity, thanks to Vice Chancellor and Advisor, to visit some really wonderful institutions abroad and also understand how these institutions pursue their career interest. One such institution was Wharton, and I was so impressed and I was so, I would say, inspired that when I see students actually incubating new ideas through incubation centers at the university. So I also saw that it is a very nuanced idea for business school students to reach out to organizations with requests for problems. But when we look at other schools, be it School of Journalism or School of International Affairs or School of Public Policy or indeed even new schools like Schools of Psychology, we have a lot of public problems that students can solve. So during this presentation, I would indeed appeal, and I would want to spend 2 minutes with all the panelists during the break, making a pitch on what RFPs could potentially mean for students. These are new ideas where we as student community, we as institution can actually reach out to organization and want to solve some of the problems that your institution is being confronted by the business world, and these problems actually could be solved by huge resources of students which are available at Jindal in abundance. They're also having access to some of the greatest faculty members who are teaching here. So I thought, instead of just coming to organizations and institutions for internship and placement, I really want to write to you on a new idea, a creative platform, asking you to share some of the problems that you are wanting to solve, and our student community with great mentors like Professor Sani and others, we could make an attempt to solve these problems. So the first innovative that we want to do is reach out to organizations for RFPs, request for problems. The second one I really wish, I also wanted to talk over the break, but I wanted to emphasize is we have great mentorship when it comes to faculty, but when it comes to industry mentorship or people who are at the organization to help students or mentor students, there has been a vacuum. I understand that people who are working at the industry have very less time, but I would want to appeal, we have put up a beautiful 26 pages document where we can propose innovative industry mentorship program where we can actually make students understand what they are learning in the school and how it is relevant for them when they go out and want to apply their knowledge. So with these two innovative ideas, I thought my objective is to come and talk about creativity. There are expert speakers who will be speaking on the panel discussion today, but I will take some time during the break to push these two ideas, and it is not at a very fragile level. We have written a concept note, we are ready with the presentation, and indeed we want all of you to hear us because I think this will be a win-win for both organization, institutions, think tanks, and students. With these words, thank you so much, and I again welcome you to our first CSR conclave. Thank you.
Thank you for the address, Professor. A huge round of applause for him. Professor Padmanabha Ramanujam is the Dean of Office of Academic Governance at OP Jindal Global University and a Professor of Law at Jindal Global Law School. He holds a master's degree in law from the National Law School of India, University, Bangalore, and a second master's from the University of East Anglia, UK. He has also served as a chief mentor and dean at United World School of Law and the School of Liberal Arts and Mass Communication at Karnavati University. He was the founding faculty member at OP Jindal Global University, where he served as an associate professor and associate dean, director for the Admissions and Outreach Department, and joint registrar of institution building at Jindal Global Law School. Now, I would like to invite the Professor of Eminence, Dr. Sanjeev P. Sani. Dr. Sanjeev P. Sani is a Professor of Eminence, founder and Principal Director of the Jindal Institute of Behavioral Sciences. He's also serving as a Director of Center for Leadership and Change, Center for Victimology and Psychological Studies, Center for Community Mental Health, and Center for Criminology and Forensic Studies. At the university level, he is a member of the governing body and the advisor to the Vice Chancellor. He holds a PhD degree in organization behavior. He not only possesses an extensive and rich experience of 40+ years in academia and industry, but his vision for educational sector is reflected in his work. Please welcome Dr. Sahani.
Very good morning to all of you. When she said 40 years of experience, I was really thinking, am I that old? This morning when I was reminded that there is a CSR conclave, I was wondering if any student will come of Jindal, because I know that, number of programs which we conduct, academic or other fashion related, the halls are full, but I'm really happy to see all of you over here, that the students early morning for you at 9:30 you are here. So thank you very much. I would really, I'm happy to see all of you for this conclave. JGU, we established in 2009. We have 12 schools. So those who have visited first time, when we started opening schools, one school in each year, one of the main purpose or focus was that how we can train our students on corporate social responsibility or in social responsibility. I don't know why C has taken a prominent name in a social responsibility, because I personally feel I've come from a school where I was taught right from the beginning about community development. I was taught how to help people. My parents or my society also helped me in that. Now, my background is I worked with the government of India as a bureaucrat for first 13 years and did not like working with the government typically, and then moved on to the corporations, big corporations. I worked with the 4th largest industrial house in India as well. So there I learned that 2% of the profit has to go into the corporate social responsibility. But I am extremely unhappy, I want to tell you, that most of, I'm not going to take names of the firms, most of these people have outsourced it. There's a one big PSU who spends like 750 crores of rupees every year on corporate social responsibility, but they don't know how to do it. They spend a lot of time to hire consultant to do all these kind of things. Now these consultants, whatever they think the best, they are providing, but at least something is happening. This is a research-oriented university. We really push our faculty members to do a lot of research. But when they do research, not that they get incentives, but they get a reputation internationally because they're being cited again and again. But I personally think that every research which we conduct as a faculty should reach to masses. Otherwise, it does not have any utility. I'm doing research, I'm publishing, fine. But am I doing some community development? You all are fully aware that there is, when we set KRAs, key result areas in our university, there is a 10% component, we call it a KARA, key academic result area. And we have put, and we encourage every professor that 10% some community development work, you need to do it. And I must tell you, this university, they're doing so much work in community development while involving students. And students are highly enthusiastic to travel with the faculty and visiting villages and helping people over there. Lot many studies we have in this university. Now, as a student of psychology, I'm more concerned about SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals number 3, which relates to health and well-being. And let me tell you, most of the other SDGs are also dependent on SDG 3, which is my field. Now, I just want to give you few of the statistics. In India, the major problem what we are facing is, 30 years back in 91, 92, when we did a lot of surveys, we found more than 50% of children under the age of 4, more than 50% are either stunted, wasted. Now, there are 3 types. One is a normal, one is stunted, that means highly underweight. One is wasted, is a highly underweight, and one is that they are malnourished and there is a cognitive impairment in them. More than 50. The situation has not changed in the last 30, 40 years. Still we are at 43%. Can we take a pledge today that we need to help at least one person with that? Similarly, when we talk about well-being, we talk about mental health. Especially after the COVID, I'm fully aware that suddenly what the National Institute of Mental Health and Neurosciences, Bangalore, gave us the figures that roughly 17 to 20% people are suffering with mental health issues in India. And this is more or less same numbers with all over the world. But Now, what the researchers are coming after the COVID, they says anywhere from 43% to 60% people are suffering from mental health issues. Are we capable enough as a country to provide a mental health support? The answer is absolutely no. We have only 4,000 qualified mental health experts to cater to 1.4 billion population. Now, these 4,000, I don't want to talk about their potentiality and capability, but it's not that you just do a master's in psychology and you have become a mental health expert. No, there are specific trainings for this. And the developed countries, you cannot practice unless you have a license. Unfortunately, most of these 4,000 people may not have a license and they have open shops. Second, the diagnostic measures. Now, the classic example which I give it to you is of a learning disability. Are you aware, students, that 17% of the children in this world are suffering from learning disability? There was one movie in India a long time back, Tare Zameen Par, and then parents started realizing, oh, I hope our children is not suffering from learning disability. But there is a stigma attached with this word. If any teacher or any friend would say that, your son or a daughter requires a counseling, there is a stigma. People think that our children are not mad. We need to remove these kind of things. We need to spread awareness. And the worst is the psychiatric beds. In fact, I always encourage people not to go to a psychiatrist. Once you go and they know only about medication, then you hook onto those kind of things forever. But the psychiatric bed, out of 10,000 beds we have, only 0.8 beds are available for psychiatric patients. So, in legal, criminal justice system also talks about that insanity, which is ridiculous. I don't know why we have not transformed from this word talking insanity. That does not exist for me at all. But people are exploiting these kind of things. Number of things which in SDG 3 they talked about. Mortality rate. India has done very well. If you see after the independence or the last 70 years of history, we have done very well. Neonatal problems. But we could not tackle tobacco problem, which is easy to handle. Still, 1.5 million people die every day because of tobacco use. What are we doing for that? Now, it's not easy to visit remote areas. It is not easy to visit villages, especially for general students, but I would suggest the maximum satisfaction you will get when you go and extend a helping hand. Don't give them a sympathy. They don't want that. But extend a helping hand. And when we talk about the social responsibility on the education side, I want to tell you, still in India, we have a 43% of schools which is manned by one teacher. It is our duty. I'm glad there is one NGO which, take the excellent students, bright students, and the students go and teach without taking even money from them. Why shouldn't we all today take a pledge that we will help at least one individual in our life so that everybody should be on a mainstream? Last, I'm really grateful to Dean Padmanabhan that these type of conclaves we should organize quite frequently, because we need to educate students other than their routine education what we are providing. And I'm very grateful that you have envisaged, and today We have over 150 people in this hall, so thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your address, Dr. Sahni. Now I would like to invite Mr. Amit Kirti to deliver the special address. Mr. Amit Kirti is the Executive Director of Digital Data and Analytics team at EY. He focuses on building digital analytics and artificial intelligence capabilities for GDS Strategy and Transactions Department. He works closely with clients across sectors, helping them solve complex business problems, leveraging state-of-art technologies such as AI, machine learning, cloud, and others. Mr. Amit has been instrumental in developing multiple strategic solutions for key accounts delivering tangible profit and loss impacts. Requesting you to come to the dais.
So firstly, I think we are very fortunate to be here, especially on this topic, which is so pertinent for our country and for our community. So thank you for having us here, is the first thing I would like to start with. And it's great to be, among this high energy student population, and especially for this topic, which is very, very pertinent, for all of you and including us, as we shape the future of this country, right? That most of you will pick up different responsibility, different roles across organizations, across sectors. I think one common theme which can bind us all together, irrespective of the sectors, irrespective of the domains, irrespective of the capabilities that we are going to develop over a period of time, is really the conscious effort of ours towards giving back to the society. And on that, I would like to thank Professor Ramanujam for setting this up and laying down the context, and Professor Dr. Sahni, who laid down the right narrative, right, and kind of highlighted what is the quantum of impact and quantum of need that we have in this country and in our society, right? So nothing more is needed if we all, like he said, right, sir, I would borrow those words from you, if we all can take pledge and really start thinking about how do we bring a difference in at least one person's life, right? May it be education empowerment, may it be getting somebody to, be self-dependent, may it be getting somebody out of a difficult situation, but how can we bring, impact on individual lives, individual communities, right? And I think if all of us take that pledge and start working on that together, I'm sure we can bring a lot of difference. And seeing such a good participation from this young generation, it brings a lot of hope, a lot of confidence and conviction to all of us, I'm sure, that, we are looking at the right future, right? So with that, I'll come to this topic, which is about CSR. And sir, if I may say, you talked about the corporate, the C word, right? The corporate versus the community. I think you are bang on, right? A corporate doesn't operate in isolation, right? Well, let's look back for a moment what CSR means. A corporate operates in a society, right? It is drawing revenue, capabilities, different kind of impressions, reactions, emotions from a community, right? So they are binded together very, very strongly. And I think CSR in its true sense means how a corporate, starts to think about giving back to the society as a responsible organization, as a responsible group of management and citizens and employee, how they start thinking about the community back, that where they are operating, how are they bringing the right impact on the community. So I quite agree with you that, that C has to work very, very closely, both the corporates and community. And in the current context of thing, including the SDG goals, I think corporates have started to understand that priority more so in the recent past, wherein they started looking at how do they bring the right impact on sustainability, on environment, on equality, diversity, inclusion, all of this. And these are various practices. There is no one method which kind of fits in all the corporate. There are different approaches that corporates have taken. And I'm very happy to say today I represent the organization whose larger purpose is to build a better working world, right? It's not about only profit. It's about EY's vision is to build a better working world by contributing at each level towards the community, right? And we are very happy to share that this topic kind of resonates very well with both the organization that we represent as well as individually. I've been very close to some of the efforts right from the beginning of my career on the social side of it. So really thankful that I've got this opportunity to share my thoughts with all of you. And I think when I look at CSR in the current context, there are immense opportunities across the society. Today corporates, as you get into the jobs, you will find Today, corporates are trying to see how they can be more carbon neutrals, right? How can they configure and they relook at their supply chain to encourage vendors who are driving the right behaviors, for example, driving the right equity, following the right regulation, driving environmental sustainability and sensitivity, and all of that can happen if the organizations are operating ethically, and that is what all the organizations today are being encouraged by both the policymakers as well as the organization management. And in that, I see great opportunities for all of you to build your future. When you join your respective organization, I think the sensitivity towards the SDG goals is very high, and all the organizations are relooking, how do they use sustainability and community services to not only create a good brand in the mind of the consumers, but also associate more with the employees' personal ambitions, right? Today, as employees, we want to be associated with the organizations who are socially responsible, environmentally sensitive, and all this happens when organization encourage these behaviors, make or take steps to kind of ensure that their actions are represented in their daily operations by choosing the right decision, choosing the right partners, whether it is their suppliers, whether it is their employers, whether it is their customers, and creating an environment of mutually respectable situations, right? And encouraging these behaviors. Many of the large corporates today are starting to publish their environment data, that how effective they are on controlling their carbon footprint. Many of them have laid down policies for their suppliers, for their vendors, so that those vendors are not encouraging any kind of misuse of regulations or environment. For example, child labor, almost all the global MNCs have taken out in their supplier policy that they are not going to deploy any supplier who's found involving child labor, right? And this is just one example. There are multiple such policies which are getting rolled out, executed, implemented in corporates today, which are encouraging this behavior towards CSR. So while we will get into the detailed sessions in the panel discussion, I would suffice to say that, I see great opportunities for all of you as you step into your jobs, into your professional careers, to make the right impact on this world by creating a community which is more responsible, by joining organizations which are more responsible ethically and as well as environmentally. So looking forward to our discussion, and thank you once again to all of you.
Thank you, Mr. Amit Kirti. We're super excited to have you here. The inaugural address will be delivered by Mr. Subrajyoti Bhaumik. Mr. Subrajyoti Bhaumik is the Partnership Officer, Public and Private Engagements at the UNICEF. He is an expert in business responsibility and has been pursuing CSR in different roles over the last 17 years. He has worked with associations, companies having involuntary displacement, consulting firms, and the UN system in various capacities. He is an advocate for business for results within the UNICEF India ecosystem. He is also working with government think tanks to promote child rights in the formal reporting structures and mandates of the Ministry of Corporate Affairs. Requesting you to come to the dais.
Good morning and a warm greetings to everybody. Dr. Sani, Professor Ramanujan, Mr. Kirti, academics, and my dear friends. So, corporate social responsibility, the topic of today, it's been around in this terminology for the last 7 decades globally. But if we reflect back and see, in India, it's been there for more than 100 years. We have seen large corporate houses in India build infrastructure assets for community. We have seen schools, colleges, hospitals, temples, community halls, which have been built by corporates way before CSR became a common term. In practice, in modern India, we can say it's been more than around 15-20 years when it's become more common with with the economy of the country opening up post liberalization and a lot of MNCs coming in. It's been a common. I mean, I've been a part of this system for more than 17 years now. But if you look at it, how the formal structure has actually evolved, it's been a gradual process, but it's been a very firm, definitive process in India. It started in 2011 with the National Voluntary Guidelines on Social, Environmental, and Economic Responsibility. They were called the NVGs. They were voluntary. There was no compulsion on anyone to adopt it. it evolved into the business responsibility reporting, which was mandated for the top 100 companies in 2012 by the SEBI, Security and Exchanges Board of India. In 2013, the New Companies Act came into place, where we had the 2% law, or CSR, when it was formally introduced, being the first country in the world to do so. It was totally something which was unheard of, and but it was path-breaking in the sense that there was no other country which had actually formulated any policy around CSR spending. In 2015, the SEBI, the Business Responsibility Reporting, actually expanded to around 500 companies. So the scope of businesses being socially responsible was increased. That was in addition to CSR. Then in 2019, the national guidelines for responsible business conduct were introduced, which were again voluntary in nature, but then we saw that how the ambit and scope had just gone from beyond social to be more encompassing, more linked to global SDGs, not only SDGs, but also the UN Global Compact and many other frameworks as such. 2020, it was taken, there was a new reporting format which the BRR evolved into, which was called the Business Reporting and Sustainability Reporting, Business Responsibility Sustainability Reporting, the BRSR framework, which has now been mandated for the top 1,000 companies. So it's been a very evolutionary process of CSR in India. The challenge which has been that, even with CSR being in law for more than 7-8 years now, there's been a lack of an integrated framework of measurement to see, where are we going, what are we doing, what has been the impact. If you ask anybody, and we have so many people over here from different walks of life, nobody can tell you what 8 years of CSR spending has achieved. The average spending has been above 15,000 crores on CSR per year, but the achievements cannot be measured against many frameworks. COVID-19 was a game changer. It showed, how corporates could be socially responsible in more ways than one. CSR was, CSR companies actually went out of their way to support people during these pandemic times and difficult times for the country. So if you see that, corporations since 2014 and even before that have invested in socially responsible plans and ethical business plans for a lot of years. But many of these plans were not systemically designed. They have been generally, okay, we see a problem in our local area, let's address that. If we see a problem, which we feel that the local administration believes in, let's change that. It's never been systemic, it's never been to achieve a goal. What has been missing is a framework where they can work together, a framework which, can help them to see the end point of what they want to achieve. And I believe that framework is provided by the SDGs. SDGs are very ambitious set of 17 goals which were set up in 2015, which would be achieved by 2030. We are halfway there in time. We are not halfway there in results. We have a long way to go. And that's why it makes me more happy to see the new generation of people. All of you are going to be managers tomorrow, going and doing things. So you have an ample opportunity to go out and contribute, to achieving of these SDGs. See, just by reducing poverty, hunger, discrimination, etc., it's good for businesses. How? Because people who are at the suffering end of the spectrum today are tomorrow's customers, tomorrow's workforce. A company can only, an organization survives in the ecosystem which it breeds and which includes its customers, future customers, etc. So if we do not have an able customer at the end, 20 years down the line or 10 years down the line, whom will the company serve? Together, CSR and SDGs can provide a powerful model for sustainable growth and measurable growth, which is very important. If you see the Schedule 7 of the Companies Act, I mean, I don't know how many of you are law students over here, but there is a Section 135 within the Companies Act and a schedule which outlines what you can or you cannot do under CSR. But a lot of those themes do align with the SDGs at large. India is a signatory to the 2030 agenda. It's a very, very ambitious target India has taken up. There are 169 targets under those 17 SDGs, but it's not possible that the government alone can achieve it. It's taken huge steps. It's taken huge steps. There has been a lot of effort by a lot of stakeholders, but it's not something which can be achieved alone considering the scale and size of our country. Businesses have a strong role to play in this. If they can together come and look at SDGs as a way to target the problems which they want to address, they can actually come and contribute to the development and the achievement of the SDGs. When the future of the world is at stake, with our planet facing considerable economic, social, and environmental challenges, companies cannot visualize the future without trying to protect the ecosystem in which they survive and thrive. Implementing SDGs as a part of their CSR and corporate strategy can not only contribute to their business goals, but also will help companies achieve the holy grail of triple Ps: people, planet, and profits. Thank you, everyone.
Good morning, everybody. How are you doing? You are out there in order to learn something that we hope and I expect will make a difference in the way you approach your careers. And what I'd like to say by way of preliminary remarks before I turn over to the panel to reflect on the issues, two things. One is we are dealing with a panel today that is on gender inclusion. And 2 points that I want to make before I ask the panel to address various dimensions of gender inclusion in the context of corporate social responsibility. The first thing is, if you were paying attention to those introductions, there's a phenomenal collection of people up here with absolutely extraordinary experience and responsibilities in the corporate sector and in the non-for-profit sector that focus on the critical issues addressing the functioning of corporations in society and their understanding of corporate social responsibility. The second preliminary observation I'd like to make is that you heard from a previous speaker in the general introductions a reference being made to Sustainable Development Goal number 3, the one on health. And as the incoming dean of the new School of Public Health and Human Development, that is, of course, the SDG that we focus on. However, in this panel, we will be focusing on SDG 5, which is called Achieve Gender Equality and Empower Women and Girls. And before I focus on 4 different sub-issues reflecting on the question of gender inclusion in the context of SDG 5, let me recall some of the component elements of it. It has to do not only with more representation of women in jobs, but a lot more. It has to do with eliminating discrimination, yes, but also ending violence and exploitation of women and girls, eliminating harmful traditional practices, such as early forced marriage and female genital mutilation, increasing the value of unpaid care and promoting shared domestic responsibilities, ensuring full participation of women in leadership and decision-making, and ensuring access to universal reproductive rights and health. There are other targets in the Sustainable Development Goal number 5 that relate to equal rights and economic resources, property ownership, financial services for women, promoting empowerment of women through technology, and adopting, strengthening policies and enforcing legislation on gender equality. So you can see that this SDG 5 is a very rich one that kind of forms the background for our discussion of gender inclusion in corporate social responsibility. Now, I'm standing up here because the microphone is not near me, but we're going to be settling down there as a panel to discuss a range of issues from the perspective of the extraordinary experience of the panelists. And I'd like to start, and what I'm going to do, if the panelists will agree with me on this, what I'd like to do is to invite one panelist to start us off on several questions that I'm going to propose to them. And then the other panelists will follow in whatever order they feel like, whatever spontaneously they want to say on that particular theme. And we plan to finish this by 12:45 so that we can turn it over to you for your questions. So start thinking now on what are the questions that you would like to address to this extraordinary panel. Let me start out with this question. We do understand that India's approach to gender inclusion is different from, may be different from, the practices to gender inclusion from the corporate sector in other parts of the world. So how different is India's approach to gender inclusion from the practices of the corporate sector in other parts of the world, and what are the main reasons why India's ranking in the World Economic Forum's Global Gender Gap for 2020 is worse than in 2012 because it ranks now 135th out of 146 countries. It's in the bottom 8% of the world on gender inclusion. Why is this? Is India doing something different than other parts of the world? Why are 92% of the world achieving better results on this question of gender inclusion? So if the panelists will agree, I'd like to suggest that Shama Deer from Ernst & Young start us off, because she has so much experience all over the world that she has a better sense than probably anybody in this room of the diversity experience in different countries. Why is it so different in the rest of the world than in India? Would you like to start us off on that?
Thank you, Professor Marks. Good morning, everyone. I hope all of you are up and awake on this important topic. First of all, while we're talking of gender inclusion, it's good to see so many females in the room, and likely so on the panel. So I do wish when these set of females would graduate, they come and join the workforce and add on to the economic development of this particular country. But you make a very important point, Professor Marks, is why is India very different? And when we compare it across the globe, I think there are a couple of factors related to it, and it's quite an interesting study of how Indian women population is contributing less and less each 5 years to the economic or the GDP of the country. I think first and foremost is the social fabric of where we are. There is a good chunk, and some of those numbers are above 55% of our population is still in an unorganized sector. There are areas around disguised employment which is still not counted in our GDP. So that's one of the important factors which is there. But then I'll come back to the factor that this conclave is all about CSR, so I'll continue with the C of the CSR here. I think even in corporate, where what we see is, and I'm talking of Fortune 500 companies because that's where I'll belong and that's where most of the clients that we work with belong. It's easy to hire women at entry level. Any of the organization, you'll see women at about 50-55% of the headcount at an entry level. Now, I'm not talking of hardcore engineering companies. I'm not talking of product manufacturing, steel manufacturing. That's a different segment. We'll come to that. But let's say the other segments where it's less engineering, it's less manual labor. But what we see is typically as we go to the mid-level management and the senior level management, that's where we start seeing the gender drain happening. And the major reason to that is how our social fabric is. Are women given that kind of a support in the society is a larger question than necessarily what corporates can do. Corporates can bring in policies. They can say we would want to encourage women. We have got good maternity policies. We've got good support, even paternity policies, which helps the other way around. But I think it's equally important for society at large to start thinking. Another important factor which is very critical is we don't have good childcare facilities in India. That's where you start seeing women moving out of workforce from the age of 28 to 35. Now let's keep that age bracket in place and say that's the place where men typically would accelerate in their mid-career. So by the time women are leaving workforce for that 7-8 years, and if they want to come back to workforce after that 8 years, men who are their colleagues at that point of time have already accelerated or super accelerated. But there is also an evidence of research, I think it was done by Wharton or any other, maybe it was Wharton or Brown University, which said women who have sustained their working time till the age of 40, then they are unstoppable. But that's the kind of run we need as a society to give it back to them. I think India has got another big issue is we are going through almost the third decade post-liberalization. So we are still figuring out what increased per capita income would mean for us. Till the time we understand and we appreciate some of those elements, I think we'll go through this churn for another 2 to 3 decades till, by when we would say it's an equal participation of women in the workforce as well as in the economic development. Now that's what I'll say for the Fortune 500 companies. The agricultural society, the agricultural part of our economy is a different ballgame. Though researchers might say otherwise, but the practical reality is there's a lot of contribution that women do in that segment of our economy, which can't be proven by data, but from a corporate standpoint, there are a lot of policies, even as EY, we do a lot of policies wherein we encourage women to come back. We have good women workforce in technology. I think gig working would encourage more women to come back to workforce, but it's equally incumbent upon society at large and government policies to encourage that. As much as we would have a CSR fund now allocated to our in our P&Ls and profit and balance sheets, it's equally important we would have a gender diversity ratio equally coming in our financial statements and the public policies as we go forward. So that would be my initial submission, Professor Mark.
I can do that, only because I'm the most nervous, I think. So I want to get my points out quickly. But thank you, like Shama said, thank you to the women who've come here today and also the men, because I think in that lies the basis of all equality that we talk about, especially, I mean, more broadly speaking from the gender binary space. As we think about this and as we think about the social fabric that has sort of supported CSR and gender and a discussion and a deliberation of that, I think it's quite important also for us to recognize that as a country, in the last year, only 0.43% of our CSR spending actually went on women's empowerment. And it's even lower for gender inclusion. So when we speak of gender, we speak of women and men, but there are other gender identities that one kind of ignores. But having said that, and the other point that Shama mentioned was on different sectors, which is absolutely fascinating to me. And I was, we've done some work at SPRF, which is my organization, where we looked at wages for housework. And there's a study which estimates that about 10 to 39% of GDP in India comes from unpaid wages for housework, which for me is just, it's mind-blowing that, the things that we take for granted, the things that we do as, things that we just do, could actually be counted as things that are part of the workforce. I think in that there is also space to recognize what the government is doing. We are a country of 1.4 billion people. It's very difficult to tackle and cater to the sensibilities of 1.4 billion people and those 1.4 billion realities or more. So in that, I think the government does, from time to time, take concrete action. I think the implementation and execution definitely can be improved. But also there is a space for each of us to play a stronger role in how we think about gender in the normative spaces that we occupy, in the household spaces that we occupy, in the occupational spaces that we host. Each of you have a space in your lives as students, as professors, as deans, as camera people, and all of us as well, that where we can empower each other, where we can also work towards empowerment of others, and also not talk down. I think so far when we think about CSR, we always think of it from this aspect of righteousness, which for me is a bit problematic personally, because the good to have is not the need to have. And the need to have is what we need to address from time to time more strategically. But I will stop there.
Morning, everybody. And I think today being here with a lot of women, as everybody said, I feel very grateful to be in this audience of many women. And I won't discount the men as well. I was having a very interesting chat with the student who came with me. And he was curious to know, first, why was I a CEO of a deaf cricket organization? And as a woman CEO, I'll take cricket as an analogy and probably say a few words on that, because that also helps me communicate with you all that a kind of diversity with women is not only restricted to the mindset that you can't do other things. So when I was given this opportunity to look at deaf cricket and spearhead that, I guess there are not many women who do that. But this is just a message for you all that everything that you can do is no different from any man can do. So that's the first part of it. The second part of it that I'd like to share with you all is that today we have graduated. We have graduated from a VUCA world to what I'm told, and I was educated by a friend of mine, to a Bani world. And what does Bani world mean after post-pandemic is brittle, anxious, non-linear, and completely incomprehensible. So we are actually in that state of mind. And after the SDG 5 that I was hearing, we have seen in the corporate sector a sea change, that we move from there to what we call as the social performance metrics. And that is where many organizations have graduated. All of you all know this new terminology of ESG, which is environment, social, and governance. Governance plays a key role, and every organization has now recognized that. And again, I'll go to this young student who was with me, and he comes from the law. I think that's what you study, right? You study law. And the legal fraternity, the financial fraternity doesn't want to recognize how CSR gets aligned for both the legal and the governance factor for the financial instruments that every organization leverages. And I think you mentioned that also in your speech, that it is very important to see how you can align social performance for CSR. And for that, I must admit that we are not really clear, or we don't have clarity how to create those processes. And today, globally, these processes have been defined. Yes, the gender diversity plays a very important role. But I think at some point we have to recognize that the SDG has moved and we have to see how we are going to really progress to ESG. I'll expand on that later, but I'll give the other panelists an opportunity.
Thank you. I'll try and be brief. But I would like to address, Professor Marks, your question of why are we lagging so much behind? You quoted the report and our poor ranking. Just very briefly and just a few initial reflections, is perhaps because gender emerged, particularly in the context of India, as a critical political category much later. Because if you look at our history of independence, and because we were under the colonial rule, so at one point the focus was, of course, to win the independence. And in the process of winning independence, there was also an effort to assert our uniqueness as opposed to the racial supremacy theory of the British and others, right? So there was a very conscious attempt, and this is more for the students, to assert us as one, men and women. And for example, Sarojini Naidu very famously in one of the speeches said, "I am not a feminist. I will whisper to you that I am not a feminist." But that was not the idea of feminism was considered to be a very, very colonial idea. And was also considered that British women, because 1920s, when we were at the peak of our independence, was also the time when there was the peak of the suffrage movement. In England, women got the right to vote in 1920. So the whole idea was there to create a very strong separation. If you look at the social reform movement in India, a big part of it was also reform, so widow remarriage, child marriage, abolition, sati abolition, but a big part of it was also revivalism. Invoking Sita and Savitri and talking about the idea of Indian womanhood. So there was a deep notion of, that men and women in India are equal and have always been equal. In fact, in the Constituent Assembly debates, when the idea of reservation for women was brought in, all the women members were opposed to the idea of reservation. And they said that, in India, we do not need special treatment. In fact, they spoke about that women fought together with men to get independence, and we do not require now special treatment. So Constituent Assembly debates, the idea of reservation was completely, declined by women. And once we got independence, an idea of the common enemy till then was the British. And we got independence, and now it is our own Indian state, and an Indian state will take care of all its citizens, men and women both. So there was no common enemy to fight against, and you see that there is a complete dissipation of the women's movement in India, actually, in the 50s and until the early 60s, because they, men and women did not see a common enemy. So the idea of gender as a critical political category emerged in the context of India much later. So the radical left movements, women started participating, late 60s, the anti-price rise movements. In fact, again, of course, 75 to 77, we had the emergency, so the early movements also suffered as a result of that. It's even in the 70s, when women started talking about, for example, wife beating, it was attributed to alcohol abuse. So domestic violence as a concept also was not attributed as a problem because it was considered wife beating. So it is only in the 80s and early 80s and late 80s that you started getting autonomous Dalit women's movements emerging in India. So autonomous Dalit organizations came in, Dalit women's movement, Dalit women saying that, the Indian women's movement is Savarna, that means it is blind to caste-based realities, and India's Dalit movement is masculine, that it is blind to gender-based realities. So from that, I'm sorry, I'll take 30 more seconds. In the 1970s, we have the setting up of the Committee for the Status of Women in India, CSWI. CSWI gave its report in 1974, the Toward Equality Report. It was in the Toward Equality Report that for the first time we recognized that women are becoming a minority in India, not in terms of numbers, but in terms of their political presence, but in terms of their economic presence, but in terms of their social status. So the conversation in terms of women as a critical political category was only emerging at that time, and even the Toward Equality Report and CSWI rejected the idea of reservation then. To 1996, when the 73rd and 74th Constitutional Amendments Act gave 33% reservation to women in Panchayati Raj institutions and municipal governance, which happened for completely different reasons, which will take a lot more time. I will not talk about it. So the emergence of women as a critical political category took time. So we are, and then of course, questions of caste and class and religion and region and other intersections with gender. So the conversations emerged in such a way that are dealing with it with gender as a critical political category. Therefore, we still don't have the 33% reservation bill is still pending in the parliament and in the debate. So I think that is something that we have to take cognizance of when we talk about gender in the Indian context. I'll stop there and trying to talk about the difference, but I'll come back later for more. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much. Frankly, I had no idea we would get an answer to the question, why is India different with respect to the gender gap? And we've had these presentations, but there must be other panelists who also want to address this question of the differences between India and the rest of the world with respect to trying to close that gender gap. Are there any other observations on this point? Yes.
Yeah, I have a little observation. I guess, I'm going to just speak because I'm sure the government of India must be doing a lot of work, and the insight given by Upasana and of course our fellow panelists, it's very, very good. And, what we have done, obviously, as a multinational, and we are a British multinational, and we have actually looked at from a different perspective. You see, what we can do is, we have a two-pronged approach. One is, of course, what we can do within our area of influence as a international company in India with 92 stores, and of course a big supply base, not only in India, in Bangladesh and Sri Lanka. So essentially we see there's a lot of similarity what we see in India. That's one. The second is obviously the whole gamut of issues which we have seen when we have started the interventions from our perspective, and also trying to rally similar like-minded corporates together so that we can make a difference. So I'm going to be talking more about what we have done, but I do represent an industry which has 60% of women in the supply chain, and as a company, of course, we are I think pro-gender equality or equity for that matter. So we are 70% women in our organization. So I think we have women leaders, although if you look at maybe the news, we have the first women co-CEO in the last 134 years of our history. So that's the other thing. But I think during if you look at our ranks, we do have a lot of women leading. But my area of work actually looks at how do we secure the supply chain from a risk perspective, and how do we take that proactive approach, so where we actually engage with both men and women. That is what we found. I think we can talk about things, but if you look at the practicality of it, the issues are real. And when we go to a garment factory where we have women workers working, and the circumstances and then the market forces that actually work, which actually creates the problems, it is phenomenal. The idea is how do we address it in a way which is beneficial. And as a company, we say, we believe in diversity and inclusion, but we have actually flipped it. We say inclusion in diversity. First we include, and then we look at the diversity. Because this is more complex, as we can actually see. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And yes, please. You need this mic.
Thank you. Few observations. So I look across, manage close to 23 countries across Asia Pacific, and then also a number of developed countries in the world that I work with. Few observations have been that the induction of women in Indian workforce, or rather the entire South Asian or the Indian subcontinent, had been pretty late. So are we looking at the right numbers? Number one. The number two is the narrative building around it. And when I talk about the narrative building, I think it's around the way the champions are created. For the most of the rest of the world, that process started happening quite some time back, and they are much ahead of us in terms of the time frame. So if I look at any of my organizations that I have worked with, each site will have identified one or at least one or two female leaders. And they will become the spokesperson for women inclusivity and the workplace equality and those kind of things. We still don't have that much in India yet to the level that it should be. Now the question is why? Are we like a little bit late in that journey? And my feeling is, the reason also is that inherent fabric and the thread of inclusivity that we follow in India. We are very inclusive people, and you realize that when you go to the various other parts of the world and you start observing that. So, no one wants to take that podium and be the single person to talk about that stuff. So if I am there and there are 5 more senior women leaders in my company, I'll share the mic with all of them. I will not be the self-designated spokesperson for the women right in the company. And that is the difference, and that is a huge difference. Because if you don't have the identified champions at one level, the progress that is happening consistently, but at the other level, you don't have those champions who can take the mic and speak about it. So perhaps it's the narration building difference around it. From a corporate perspective, I think it is happening right now, but I think we need to use a lot of gender-neutral languages. And just not the gender-neutral, but the non-binary gender-neutral languages. And why that is important is because the image it projects, the feeling of empowerment that it creates is immensely important. So if I take a day off and being a mother for my child care, it is expected. But if my male colleague do it, everyone comes and talk about it. Nothing wrong in that, it should be promoted, but you cannot differentiate that because it gives the impression, if I am doing it, it is my emotional burden, but if my male colleague is doing it, it is something to be celebrated. Truly, is it? I don't think so. And these are those very, very small changes that we have to push, and we have to push consistently. We have to consistently fight over it. And just to build on to that point that Shama raised around the 40-year kind of milestone, I think as women, a lot of time we think in a non-binary logic, and we are very, very understanding of the fact, but there comes a point when your kids are like 8 to 10 years of the age, and beyond that level of being the people pleaser, and that is where the unstoppability happens, if that is a word. So I will hand.
Now I would like to hand it over to Professor Hebatullah Adam to moderate the session.
Okay, thank you, Megha. Distinguished guests, colleagues, and dear students. First of all, I would like to welcome you all to the second panel discussion of JGU's B Conclave on SDGs. In this panel today, we are going to spotlight on the changing role and relevance of corporate social responsibility in developing countries and the importance of technologies in advancing CSR output. So therefore, we were lucky, and I would like to thank all the organizers that they have been able to have with us this beautiful gather today of experts in their field who have devoted themselves to social responsibility and inclusion and to sustainability, skill development, and social work. Okay, I hope my voice is is now good. So I would like to thank you all. This is the first point that I wanted to begin with. Now I would like to start with a general introductory question to all our panelists, asking them in what way you have been engaged in corporate social responsibility during your working years. So may I start first by Mr.
Thank you. Firstly, thank you for having us here, and great to meet the panel members. So CSR is something I think all of us, firmly believe in, and that's why I think one of the reasons that motivated us to be here. And so is the case with me. I think I've been involved with CSR very early in my life, not through, let's say, corporate per se, but even in my personal capacity. I started looking at how do I, kind of get involved with some of the orphanage, some of the schools, and can go there as a young professional and contribute in whichever form and shape I could, right? And then over a period of time, I think I got the opportunities to work with very good organizations where this was part of their core philosophy. And today, as an EY, our purpose, laid out purpose, is to build a better working world, which means that, we are doing a lot of things to drive this CSR and to create the impact on the people where it is needed the most. And therefore, I've got quite a few cases where I'm currently involved, either it is in terms of education for the underprivileged ones, or community service for some of the cases where, some of the government and infrastructure facilities are not existing. And I think we'll talk about some of the things later, but I think this is something that resonates a lot with me personally, because I think it's time as India grows to the next phase. All of us, I think, feel that sense of responsibility that, how each one of us can contribute back to the society from where we come, right? And I think there are enormous opportunities today that I see where we all can contribute in different form and shape. And that's what is an attempt that I'm trying to do at this point of time.
Yeah, thank you for having me here. I hope I'm audible. Okay. So my journey with CSR and philanthropies has been a bit on and off in a different way. I've worked as part of certain philanthropies, implementing and making changes to regulations and policies that led to basically a framework change in the manner in which such philanthropies are able to render their services, meet target audiences, meet national goals. Apart from that, of course, on a different range. So the beauty of engaging with CSR as a career standpoint also, it brings to the light the fact that you can be part of it, you can implement, but you can also bring change to bring a complete organizational shift and the manner in which they engage with CSR and philanthropies. So my experience of largely working with both national and international philanthropies has been that many of these require a phenomenal amount of policy change, which actually gets the nuts and bolts of it, gets the whole vehicle running. And sometimes you need a complete change in thought process, bring stakeholders along and so on. I run currently a not-for-profit organization called India Tech, which is in the startup ecosystem space. And we do work extensively both for profits and not for profits, largely in the area of how do you trigger wealth creation in India, how do you trigger livelihoods in India, how do you trigger inclusivity in India that can help the economy grow and give people a better quality of life, put that extra bucks into the people who are looking for work, connect the hinterlands into India, trigger village GDPs and so on. So the canvas is pretty phenomenal, and I've been engaged in bits and pieces of it over the last 20 years. So that's been my journey and experience.
Hi everybody, good afternoon, and thank you so much for having me here. In my last, I would say 15, 16 years of working, I have been engaged on the CSR front from various angles. That is, if I were to talk about the larger public affairs hat that I wear, at times it's very important for any organization, and not at times, it's perhaps one of the inherent duties of any organization to really demonstrate its character. And I have been part of creating those CSR strategies in my avatar as a consultant years ago for Fortune 500 companies that have been operating in the country. To me, and especially when I talk about the larger civic responsibility or the larger social responsibility, it's also about the value that I bring to the table when it comes to these strategies and that comes to these discussions is how is it that the CSR programs really reflect the pulse of the nation? They really deliver some kind of impact. They can become more traceable, they can become more measurable, and more importantly, they are in tune with what the nation wants. Again, with a different hat here, I would also talk about the role the academic institutions have played in really bringing CSR and innovations to the fore. I worked fairly closely with IIT Delhi back in 2015-16 on focusing on central schemes to support people with disabilities through innovative, groundbreaking technologies, but also through reverse innovation. To the larger point, I would say, the will to create an impact at a larger scale has to be there. And perhaps, especially with the audience that is there in this room, it's important to see a part of this change that you want to create in the world, and the avenues would be no different. Whether you are founding member of an organization, whether you join a corporation, whether it is even in your capacity as students. And through my life's trajectory, I worked in all these capacities in the CSR front. Currently though, if I were to talk about why I'm here today, there are a lot of priorities that have been outlined at the India level. We have been tracking our sustainable development goals. From a technology standpoint, where technology can really create access, approachability, and affordability, where is it that we are trying to bridge these conversations in a larger social impact? That is the hat that I don when I talk about the government affairs and policy piece at Dell. More in the next round.
Great. Thank you very much to the organizers for today's session, for the student community that's out here to listen to us. Roughly, to elaborate on CSR, which is the opportunity for corporates to demonstrate social responsibility. And I think depending on whether they're large corporates or mid-sized or smaller, I think each one tries in their own way to demonstrate that responsibility. India as a country, we struggle with multiple challenges. Policy definitely in terms of aligning with CSR. Let's say the CSR focus of government and so on, how does the civil society align further with government? How does industry play a greater role and so on? So, it's a huge canvas and a lot of scope for various kinds of opportunities. Increasingly, we find more and more fellowship and leadership programs that are available. And so it's not only entry-level positions that are available in the development sector, but you also find a lot of mid and senior level positions that become available. And rightly so. At NASSCOM Foundation, NASSCOM being the industry body of the tech industry in India, the foundation is really part of that NASSCOM ecosystem and engages with CSR teams of various corporates, again, large, mid-sized, smaller members of NASSCOM. The way the pandemic and the last few years has changed that engagement is with the role of technology. One thing that the pandemic brought out clearly, it brought out many, many things, but one aspect that it brought out was technology as an enabler. And I think our entire effort in terms of designing programs that integrate technology to a greater extent to reach a wider audience or a larger beneficiary pool, I think a lot of that work has sort of been put into place. In addition to that, every time there's the conversation around the Sustainable Development Goals, I think India, we'd start visiting that in another year or so. And so the preparation for that, As a country, how do we fare on this measurement criteria? Do organizations like ourselves that are represented here add to any of those measurable indicators for a country at large? Those are, again, bigger, larger discussions. Personally, I've worked on both sides of the development spectrum. I've worked with funding organizations, I've worked with funded programs, and so I understand the entire space of the challenges in terms of implementing, in terms of designing solutions, and so on. So extremely happy to be on this panel today, and thank you so much, Dr. Heba, for providing us this opportunity. I'll take the rest later.
Excellent. First of all, thank you for inviting me here, and good afternoon to everyone. My role as part of engagement in CSR, it's more like as part of my role, I do quite a lot of travel, and basically our operation sites are on the remote parts of the country. We operate in more than 8 states. If you look at all these 8 states, our operational sites are in very remote locations. Sometimes these villages are cut off from the mainstream cities and facilities, infrastructural facilities. So, as part of my engagement in CSR, since I act as a focal point for the company as well as for the community, as well as for the local stakeholders, so my engagement involves in developing CSR programs which addresses the key societal priorities. At the same time, we keep aligning with our SEMCORP group initiatives, community investment initiatives. So, like I said, some of these programs came out to be flagship program for us in terms of I can say local ecological restoration programs, rejuvenating the water bodies in the local communities. And when we do the rejuvenation, we take out the slit. Then this is fertile and organic manure. It acts as an organic manure, and this is taken by the local farmers for their soil fertility, improving the soil fertility, and that has really helped them in increasing the yield. So some of these programs were quite unique to us, and I have been part of those flagship program developments. Apart from development of programs, I also worked on to something like governance and integrity in CSR. So a site like us, the business like us, which is diversified, in the sense that the work is spread out across 7 to 8 states, how do I control the spend of money? How do I ensure that the money given to the program is wisely spent? So we had some kind of an internal mechanisms like geotagged photos, which when we taken, it clicks the latitude, longitude along with date time stamps. So that helps us to initiate that this program was spent in that program for that village, particular village. So that way we were able to put in the governance integrity systems into that. Finally, it's all about ensuring the prudence of partner selections and make sure that the effectiveness of the program is measured. So we had our own internal mechanisms put in to make sure that the partner selection is done on a risk profiling basis, right? So we carry out a risk profile over the partners to make sure that their risk profile is very low or low, and only those partners are engaged in our activities. Also, we have our internal, we developed our own internal monitoring mechanisms to make sure that the effectiveness is captured for each activities. And we have been trying to improve how to improve the monitoring of the effectiveness, how the KPIs can be designed, what would be the outcomes, how to redefine the outcomes for certain programs. So that way we have been, my role has been more of to that extent, and hopefully we expect that our activities, the flagship programs could be captured across by the other companies as well. So that's it from my end. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for having me. I will keep my talk in 3 parts. One is about my journey, second is about your journey, and third is about the journey of CSR. coming to my journey, did an MBA in sustainability, and last 1 decade I have been working on sustainability, CSR, and ESG. Initially worked in other countries, and I was part of the implementation of the projects. Then I came to planning, and now I am strategizing the projects. So what I see is once you have worked on the ground, you understand what are the strategies that will work and which will not work. Also, you need to keep revisiting sites to be able to understand what is relevant today. Because I did MBA 10 years back, and things might have changed. I visited fields 7 years back, and things might have changed. So keep revisiting ground as well as the policies, the government policies, the international trends in sustainability CSR. Second is your journey. So how many of you think after the pandemic, things changed for education? The way courses were designed, the way professors teach you, has it changed? If you think yes, it has changed and technology has played a role, raise your hand. So I see most of us think that technology has played a role, especially after the pandemic, that the way teaching or education is being provided to students. Now coming to CSR, it started as, in India, it started as voluntary guidelines, national voluntary guidelines based on 10 principles of United Nations Global Compact. It was given to the PSUs, private sector undertakings, the companies owned by the government. Then it became MDG, Millennium Development Goals, which were 10 Millennium Development Goals. Then it became SDG, 17 SDGs, and now it has graduated to ESG. Now ESG is environmental, social, and governance. What is happening is, especially after the pandemic, the investor community, the big investors, the World Bank, International Monetary Fund, these big organizations have started focusing and giving more importance to ESG performance of a particular company. So what happened is the companies across the world, not only in India or not only in Europe, USA, UK, all companies have an opportunity to showcase their work towards ESG at an international platform. Now these platforms are multiple, like EcoVadis, GRI-based reporting, CDP, Dow Jones Sustainability Index, and others. So Indian companies also started following SDGs. Earlier it was like some technology starts in USA and it comes to India, it takes time, and by the time we come at par with those technologies, it becomes obsolete in the Western world. And we as Indian companies lag behind. But technology and this international level of reporting on ESG has enabled all companies, including Indian companies, to be at par with the international companies when it comes to ESG. So technology is really playing a critical role there. And so rest in the next session. Thank you.
Thank you. I feel bad about you guys sitting here just after lunch session, so some of you may be a little sleepy, so let's make it a little more behavioral. Just a couple of stats before I start. So if you look at any government portal, csr.gov or any other, so more than 50% of Indian companies do more than prescribed limit of CSR, that's 2% of net profits. So what does it suggest? It suggests it's a strategic tool, it's a tool to build reputation, at the same time it is some withdrawal from your books as well. Now, coming back to my or our story, the company I belong to, so we started some 9-10 years back, and we thought one way of giving back to the society and then growing in the process is to just find our space. So when we think about CSR, there are two ways. In general, one can think about One is you are producing something, and then there is a byproduct which has social or public good nature. The other can be you are in a multinodal framework, like the way we see it. There is government, there are regulators, there are corporations, households, consumers, and so on. So you connect somewhere in the middle, and then the opportunities are plenty to contribute. So we have gone the whole range, right from building toilets to maybe doing solar water pump testing and persuading farmers to adopt to more sustainable things. But I'll just talk briefly about two things. One where we worked with the government of Maharashtra, and this was for tribal welfare. So initial ask was just looking at government funds and tell how to improve the efficiency of these funds which are allocated. But at the same time, we told the government, okay, we can go and survey in 36 places that you pick, and we'll look at the rights they have, both including community rights and individual rights. We'll look at their livelihoods, cattle, and the way they connect to the entire ecosystem. So that was one part, and lots of these suggestions were implemented by the government. The other bit which we did was with government of Rajasthan, where we looked at just the role of culture in economy and looked at from a marketization perspective, how the artist community can benefit, what kind of livelihood opportunities they have, including the mobility opportunities, how do they contribute to even sophistication, how do they benefit from technology at all. So that's pretty much what we do. When we have something in our hand, we try to take that extra step and give it back to the society. Thank you.